Hello, I'm Devil Joe, and this is a post-commentary on an any percent speedrun of DEADBOLT. I've actually already done a post-commentary on this game before, and if you've watched the other one on my channel, then you've probably heard a lot of this stuff before, but there's a significant change in the routing for this run as opposed to the last run, so had to make a new video for it. At time of recording, this is also my best run of the game, but there's a lot of changes going on in the game's community right now, so probably won't last for that long. So the very first thing I do is the biggest skip in the game. It's skipping the tutorial mission by going into the menu and hitting quit mission. The game is structured into missions, and when you quit out of the tutorial mission, it puts you back into the hub world, even though you haven't been there before, so you skip the tutorial doing that. So the basic idea with DEADBOLT is that it is a mission-based stealth action game by Hapu Games, previously known for Risk of Rain, and I think that's it. You play as the Reaper, and your job is to take care of the undead and complete whatever mission objectives the game gives you. Of course, by take care of the undead, I usually mean shooting them in the face, but sometimes you can get away without doing that, depending on what the objective of the mission is. You just saw the first mission, and it's pretty similar through the rest of the game. You talk to your fireplace, get an idea of what you're supposed to do, go into the mission, complete all the objectives, then get back to your car and drive back home. Of course, it's obviously more complex than that, especially because you die in one hit to basically anything, so stealth becomes very important, as well as knowing where all the enemies are and what they're going to do. The routing for this game is kind of a puzzle that is very interesting, and it also has one or two neat little glitches. Like at the beginning of this level, I hit the restart level button, which instantly killed me and skipped the cutscene at the beginning of the level. I'll be doing that at pretty much every level that has a cutscene from here on out. That does mean that I've never beaten this game without dying, but, you know, we have to make sacrifices in order to go fast sometimes. So, now we're going into Mission 3, which is different from the other two in that it actually has an objective other than kill everything. Well, the last mission technically did too, but after you got the objective, it told you to kill everything at the end anyway. In this one, you only have to get all the objectives and then get back to your car. It doesn't matter which enemies are killed and which ones aren't, so I skipped by a lot of them. A lot of the time this ends up making the levels look more interesting, or at least be more difficult to route effectively, which I think makes it more fun, so I like it. So something you'll notice frequently, because it happens all the time in this run, is that I'm often running right by enemies or narrowly avoiding them shooting at me. That's because a lot of the movement in this game is fairly exact, and standing in the wrong place for the wrong time can cause enemies to react in a different way than I would normally expect. I've got most of this beginning stuff down pretty well, but there's some stuff later on in the game that is still difficult, especially since the route is still under revision. Most of the stuff up until the first shopping trip is pretty much the same as the previous runs, though. There's a lot of running around and shooting enemies with the starter revolver, which is okay, but not fantastic, and then also looking and picking up the much better weapons that are found throughout the levels. There's also a lot of dodging enemies by going into grates by turning into smoke, which the Reaper is apparently able to do with his lighter or whatever. Grates make you invincible once you're inside of them, and they are also very quick to move through, but they are only in specific parts of the levels, so you have to work with the level layout in order to use them effectively. Up in this level there's also the knocking on doors mechanic that I don't use a huge amount, but it's still worth noting. Knocking on doors makes the nearest enemy have to come by and investigate, but it does not make them aggro all the other enemies around them, so it's useful for pulling individual enemies around the level. Sound in general is useful for pulling enemies around the level, which becomes fairly important later on when I shop and get a much louder gun. There ends up being kind of a balancing act between making enough noise to pull enemies around, but also not biting off more than you can chew by drawing everyone around at once. Oh, also, small input mistake there. When you go to the end of the level screen, you have to mash the fire button and the interact button really quickly, and if you press E too many times, then you're going to go into the docks when you get to the hub world. Small mistake, but it maybe lost a couple seconds there. You can go to the docks in order to pick up new weapons, and I'll be doing that after this mission, because in this mission, the game starts you with a silenced pistol. It's just a small gimmick for this level specifically, but the important thing is that once you have gone through a level with the silenced pistol, it defaults you back to the starting revolver in the next level. So there was not a huge amount of point in picking up a new weapon earlier, because I would still have to switch back to new weapons later. So there at the shop you can see that I picked up the Revenant and Mouse Gun. That's the big route change for the entire run, but that ends up changing a whole lot of levels in a lot of different ways compared to previous runs where I would use Death and Taxes and a hammer. The Revenant is a 5-shot revolver that is ridiculously powerful and ridiculously loud. It's also fairly inaccurate and has a lot of bullet spread, which can end up being a problem because bullet spread in this game is completely random. The basic idea is to use the mouse gun, which is a 2-shot pistol that is very accurate but also fairly weak in order to offset the problems that the Revenant has. At least in cases where the Revenant's weaknesses are actually a problem. They're not really a problem in this level. In fact, you can quickly see how useful the Revenant is right there, where I was shooting through the floors in order to hit the enemy's weak spots. Sometimes you don't really have to be stealthy. Right here is another glitch. Enemies showed up in cars, but because I'm inside a vent when they spawn, like their AI doesn't seem to start running. I don't know exactly what causes that, but it's an interesting glitch that allows me to skip past them without having to kill them. Ordinarily that would just take up some time. I do kill this guy on the way out though. If you don't kill him, then he can sometimes shoot you and kill you and make you have to replay the entire level. So now we're going into level 8, which starts introducing vampires. The game is structured into 3 different sections, one for zombies, one for vampires, and one for skeletons. Well, the skeletons are kind of like double booked with the demons, but there's still 3 sections of game, basically. Of course, now that we're nearing the end of the zombie levels, it starts introducing more vampires. It's just a transition level, basically. There's obviously some plot reasons for it, but I'm not going to go too much into the plot just because the plot is a little bit subtle and there's a lot of reading involved that I'm skipping over by just hurrying through the hub world and not paying attention to anything that anyone says in the cutscenes. The short version of it is there's a lot of stuff going on with drug trade, and that's what I've been setting on fire through most of these levels. Or at least that's what we know right now. I'm not going to go too much into the plot again, but, you know. The important bit of it is that after this level and the next one, we're going to be moving on to vampire levels, which are much more difficult than the zombie ones, even though the enemies are kind of functionally similar. All that we have left with the zombie levels is just one boss level. Bosses in this game are actually kind of interesting because they die pretty much as easily as normal enemies. They have a bit more health, but as you can see from this level, it's not really an issue. At least when you can get to them like this guy. Most bosses have some difficult level layout or interesting gimmick that makes it difficult to just do that, what I did in that level. But hey, now we're pretty much done with zombies. I think there's 2 in the next level and then they're gone forever. Of course, now that we're actually in the vampire levels, the routing changes a lot compared to previous runs because I have a different set of guns now. Previous runs where I was using death and taxes and a hammer were very stealthy compared to this, where now I'm just shooting everything and getting a lot of attention because the Revenant is very loud. It's completely worth it though once you know what you're doing, because the Revenant's high penetration through walls allows you to draw a lot of aggro if you know which ones you want to get angry at you. Then you can pull enemies around the level pretty well. In this specific run of this level, my timing was actually a little bit off because at the beginning of the level I walked and went into the grate instead of walking right into the building. That was me autopiloting from the previous route. I shouldn't have been doing that, but it worked out okay. Like I've already mentioned a couple times, the route's still being kind of figured out as we go, just because we only recently realized that the Revenant is actually faster and pretty useful in a few different places. Not in this level though. We're still kind of working on the route for this level, but it's not too much slower. I'm pretty sure we've already figured out a better route for this that is faster than the previous equipment loadout, but for right now it's just kind of running around. Seems like I'm hitting things randomly and running around randomly, but this is fairly consistent, if a little bit slower than previous route. It doesn't help that this is one of the largest body counts for any level in the game, and you have to eliminate absolutely everyone, so there's a lot of messing around to be done with how exactly you do that and get back to your car fairly quickly. I guess I should point out, since it came up in the last level and this level, that dancing vampires do not aggro on you and do not care what you do as long as you don't actually hit them. So if you hit them and kill them in one hit, then you don't have to care about them. Personally, I'd be fine if you were just allowed to let them party, but, well, the game has objectives and I have to fill them, so there we go. So now we're going into Mission 3 of the vampire levels. This introduces a new enemy type and a new mechanic in the game, which is fairly important because it comes up a lot in the next few levels. That little bottle behind the new enemy type's head is a phylactery, which will revive the enemy that it's tied to if it is left unbroken while the enemy is dead for a certain amount of time. Most phylacteries are tied to these bartender enemies that have combat shotguns, and they don't drop those combat shotguns until you take out the phylactery and they're on the ground. So you want to do that because the combat shotguns are pretty nice. There's also a few cases later on where there are boss enemies with phylacteries, and that's kind of the whole reason why we initially changed the route, and that'll come up in a couple levels. This next level, though, is pretty simple. It's just kind of, hey, you've seen all the mechanics in the vampire levels now, right? Okay, well here they all are right in front of you. Figure it out. Luckily, because of the high penetration of Revenant, we can kind of skip over the main difficulty of this level, in that the phylacteries are normally locked inside a small room that you can only get to when you've finished traversing most of the level, but since we can pierce through the walls, we can get all these combat shotguns and have as much ammo for them as we want, pretty much right at the beginning. We still end up having to traverse through most of the level anyway, though, because there's objectives in the back rooms that we have to get. You also can't get into the middle room there without hitting all of the switches that allow you to move through the vents. That's a small mechanic that's, I think, introduced in this level. It might be in another place, but I don't really use it. Basically, some passages in the grates are closed off until you can get to that area outside of the grate and turn the switch. Now we're going to go into Mission 5 of the Vampire levels. This is probably the first place that we found Revenant to be a little bit broken, so this is kind of the big thing that changed the route. Basically, there are two bosses in this level, one at the top of each building. Ordinarily, that would mean clearing out 2 buildings worth of enemies, but I'm going to do something neat right here, where I shot the enemy at the top of the left-hand building from the bottom of the right-hand building, so now she is aggroed and going to come looking for me. That's pretty important because the 2 enemies are each other's phylacteries, so you have to take out both of them at the same time in order for it to actually count. Also, because the Revenant is kind of inaccurate here, I miss a couple headshots, which means that, well, you'll see. Yeah, I had to punch her to death. The punching in this game is really, really weak, but it worked out. Doing that is actually surprisingly consistent because enemies get stun locked easily in this game as long as you keep doing damage to them. So that's what was happening there, so she couldn't hit me. It still would have been safer to just get the headshots, but it worked out fine either way. There's not a huge amount to say about this level, at least right now. There's a new enemy type, but he doesn't do a whole lot of interest. I guess he can see in the dark because he is a bat, but other than that, there's not much to him. The more important thing comes up after I clear out all the enemies. If you remember back a few levels ago when enemies spawned in cars and I was in a vent in order to prevent them from having to do anything, I'm doing that again right here. There's actually 3 waves of enemies that you would have to fight through if you didn't stay in the vent, so I'm going to wait for all of them to spawn and then run past them. Fighting them or running past them is about the same length of time, but I feel like avoiding them is a little bit safer. If you fight them, then you have to make sure that your bullets don't spread too much and you take out all the enemies quickly enough without them being able to shoot you. If you're waiting for them to just pass by, then you just have to hope that they are distracted enough by the things that I set up earlier in the level in order to make sure that they don't turn around, which pretty much always works. Coming up next, this level is another transition level from the vampires into the skeletons, but it's also a level that looks kind of weird on the settings that I have right now. You can turn the blood and gore off in this game, which is what I did, and as a result, this level looks completely different than if you were looking at it in any of the other runs that I did. I figured just for the purpose of marathon submissions, some people might care about having an option to turn the violent parts off. Basically what I'm getting at is that vampire in that room there is not actually an enemy because he normally wouldn't have a head if the violent parts were turned on. It's more plot stuff, but it's basically just disagreement between the leader of the vampires and the leader of the skeletons that results in me having to go fight the skeletons after this, basically. That's in a couple levels, though. There's still a bit more vampire stuff to deal with. Oh, also I really like how easy it is to get out of this level. Boop, bye. So this next level has a gimmick to it that doesn't really come into play. It has a timer on it where you instantly die if you don't finish the level fast enough, but obviously since I'm speedrunning it, that's not a problem. I'm actually doing this so fast that I skipped this first objective. You have to hit all of those in order to turn off the timer, but I don't have to worry about that until I'm coming out of the level rather than going into it. So right here there's a small random annoyance. When I aggro those enemies, the female vampire is moving too fast to go down the stairs, which means that I have to wait for her to slow down. It's a small annoyance, but that can happen randomly. I actually really like this level, aside from that small hiccup. You just kind of grab everyone's attention, pull them around the level using sound, and then sneak out before they can do anything about it. Especially right here, because once you hit all of the totems, more enemies spawn in, but because I hit the first one last, I was able to get into my car before any enemies spawned. Saves about 10 seconds. So coming up here is the second boss level that Revenant kind of completely breaks. This boss has 7 phylacteries spread out throughout the level, and Revenant makes it really easy when you can pierce through walls. Just keep hitting all the phylacteries and drawing enemies around. Basically, a good run of this level used to be something like 50 seconds, and now it's something more like 30, so 20 seconds is a pretty big difference. Basically, this level and the previous boss level are the big time saves, but there's a lot of other smaller time saves using Revenant in miscellaneous other levels, so it made sense to switch from Death and Taxes and Hammer to Revenant and Mouse Gun. And now we're into the skeleton levels. I don't like watching this level just because it is long, sprawling, boring, and also has the biggest mistake in the run, so I kind of... ugh. Basically right here I get the bolt-action rifle, and well, I don't know why I missed so many shots, and it's really dumb that I did. And then once I was out of ammo, I couldn't really do anything other than having to loop back around, get some more guns, and take out that guy. If I had ran at him, he would have just shot me and killed me, so... This lost probably like 20 seconds. Well, I know it's 20 seconds actually. It's pretty bad, but this is the biggest mistake in the run. It greatly annoyed me and makes it really hard to watch this level just because I'm like, this is a really dumb mistake to make, but it didn't end the run, and the rest of the run goes pretty well, so I guess I have to live with it for now. Probably better to just move on from it. Bleh. Luckily, after that mess, we start getting into some really fun levels. Like, this next one is probably one of my favorite levels in the game. There isn't really that much special to it, it's just an eliminate all the enemies level, but the level layout is fun, and I guess there's one new enemy type that comes up, even though we don't really use his gimmick at the moment. Those enemies with the grenade launchers lay mines as soon as they're aware of you, and they're not immune to those mines, which is fun, but because this level is pretty much perfectly choreographed, it doesn't actually end up mattering. I also really like the way that this ends. Like, you can just imagine that the Reaper crashes through the roof of his car and then immediately drives back home. The timing on the input for that is actually a little bit tight, but it only costs you like half a second of falling animation anyway if you miss it, so it doesn't matter. So this next level is pretty straightforward, but has an interesting tidbit to it. This is actually 2 maps that you have to move between in order to finish the whole level. The actual interesting part of that is the way that this game handles moving through different parts of a level. The game only lets you have one weapon when moving into a new area. It fills the ammo of whatever weapon you're holding and gets rid of whichever one you aren't. I choose to use this to keep refilling the bolt-action rifle, because that gun is really, really good. Like, during that second part of the level, you could see me shooting mines and one-shotting all the enemies that were running at me. That's because the bolt-action rifle is just really that good. There was also a new enemy type in that level, and I think they only show up in that level and this next one. They are, I think they're called liches, but they're basically floating skeletons in, like, overcoats or something. If you don't take those out, then they will seek out any enemies that are dead and will revive them, so I would like to say that it's important to take them out, but I don't really focus on it in this level just because of the way that it's laid out. There just isn't really a good time to get rid of them while also conserving ammo, because ammo for this level is a little bit tight. You can see as I go back down, though, that he's reviving that enemy, which can end up causing problems if the enemy moves in a certain way, but that's fairly rare, and I can just exit this way with the remaining shots that I have. So the next level is full of traps. The traps are pretty easy to avoid if you know what you're doing, but enemies do not know what they're doing, so it leads to some silly things happening. Also, because I have Revenant and it pierces pretty well, I can just immediately do that and take out the enemy in that top room. I still have to go up there to get information, so it doesn't save a huge amount of time, but it saves a little bit. So like I said before, the skeleton levels kind of end up double booked with the demon levels, so now we're in the demon levels. For the most part, the demons just behave the same as any other enemy, and they don't really introduce new mechanics, but this level has a little bit of a tiny new mechanic that you can see right there. You can take cover behind things in this game in order to protect yourself from gunshots. I don't really use it because it's not fast, but in this specific level, the cars are so wide that when you take cover behind them, it kind of teleports you to one side. So you can use that to skip a tiny bit of distance if you do it right. That's just because you can only go to the left or right side of an object you're taking cover behind, so if you're even slightly more than halfway through, it'll push you over to the other side. If you do it wrong, then you end up losing a bit of distance, because you go backwards, like right there, but it's worth trying just because it saves maybe like a second or two over the entire level. This next level uses a item duplication glitch, which is surprisingly only useful in this level. You can use it in any one of them as long as you have access to your car, but the difference here is that this level gives you a grenade launcher at the start. So by using the duplication glitch, instead of having 6 grenade launcher shots, I have 12, which makes the entire level pretty easy. This whole level in general feels kind of suspiciously easy, because I've already taken out all of the enemies, and there's no other gimmick to it. I just have to get the information and leave. In fact, it actually feels kind of awkward. So this next level has another gimmick to it, where you are being followed by a sniper through the entire thing. Anytime that you are in the light, the sniper will attempt to take a shot at you. Generally what that means is you're going to want to be always moving, sometimes shooting out lights to make it so she can't shoot at you. It's fairly interesting, but I'm glad that it's only one level. And that was the second mistake of the run. For some reason the mouse gun and the 3-shot burst rifle done on that enemy right there took way too many shots, and I don't know why that happened, but it meant that I had to use Revenant on him, which aggroed all the enemies in this room, and then they could shoot me while I was trying to shoot them. That death cost something like 8 seconds, because it was at the beginning of the level rather than later on in it, so it wasn't a huge loss, but it was still annoying. That was the only unintentional death in this run. So going up the elevator is a level transition, which means I could only keep one weapon with me, so I chose to keep the Revenant with me, and it's working out pretty well right there. So the whole point of this level is to get up to the top of the roof here where there's a sniper rifle that you can use to take out the sniper that's trying to shoot you. She's always in the same place, so I just kind of line up and shoot right as the screen is transitioning. There's not much more to it than that. Once that sniper's taken out though, these candles that we work with can set up and also snipe in the next level, so that's pretty nice. So now we're on to the final mission of the game. The final mission has a couple different parts to it. The first part is kind of skippable. It gives a certain number of targets that have to be taken out before you can move on, but nothing actually requires you to hit those targets. So I'm just ignoring that and instead moving right onto the portal that takes me to the next part of the level. And like I mentioned previously, there's a sniper setup, so you can also take out a few enemies like that. But for the most part, I have a grenade launcher that I picked up in the equipment room, so getting to this last part is not very difficult. And here's the final section of the game. I actually really love the atmosphere here, so, I mean, having me talk over it is kind of annoying, but I have to keep doing the commentary, so here we go. So up here at this area transition, there's another retry glitch where killing yourself checkpoints you past the need to find information, so you can just go right onto the final boss right here. The final boss is a big scary skeleton man named Ibzan. Every time you kill him, he respawns in another room with more enemies, and you have to do that 5 times in order to complete the game. This wouldn't be that difficult if Ibzan was ever consistent in the way that he moves between rooms, but that isn't really the case. Myself and the community have basically decided that Ibzan might as well be considered random. Luckily I've gotten pretty good at reacting to all the different places he can go, so that fight pretty much went flawlessly. So the timing for this game ends right up here when I talk to the big boss Candleman. This run specifically was actually pretty good, aside from the couple of big mistakes that I pointed out during the commentary. As more stuff is figured out using Revenant, I'm sure that a lot of miscellaneous levels could be improved, but for right now, this is a pretty decent run.